In our last two lessons, we have talked at great length how the East India Company's rules and policies were affecting diverse sections of the society in the Indian subcontinent. In this lesson, we will be focusing on the East India Company's policies and its impact on a very important section of the Indian society that played a major role in the outbreak of the Great Revolt of 1857. So let us find out which section of this Indian society we are mentioning here and how the East India Company's policies impacted them. So let us now start talking about the Indian Sepoys. The Indian Sepoys played a major role in the outbreak of the Great Revolt of 1857. But for that, we have to understand why it happened so. The Indian Sepoys played a very crucial part in the British Indian Army. This is because they occupied more than 7/8 of the population of the company army. So they were numerically dominant. But the Indian Sepoys were not given what they deserved. They had to work for the company that was an alien and foreign power in the subcontinent. That is to say, they had to work against their own people, and at the same time, they were not even given the due recognition that they deserved. The Indian Sepoys were subjected to various discriminations in the British Indian Army. Let us now find out how those discriminations took shape. Firstly, they were paid much lesser than their British counterpart. So, despite working equally as their British counterpart, the Indian Sepoys in the British Indian Army were paid much lesser. And at the same time, their service conditions were very poor. They did not get healthy and proper living conditions. They had to serve in very poor conditions, and there was no scope for promotion for them. It were the British folks who occupied the higher positions in the British Indian Army. The Indian Sepoys, on the other hand, were neglected. They were not even acknowledged and given the proper recognition that they deserved. So, they were paid less, their service conditions were poor, and they did not even enjoy any scope for promotion. So, all these reasons were actually contributing to anger in the minds of the Indian Sepoys who served in the British Indian Army. But before proceeding with this lesson, let me ask you a question. European and Indian Sepoys in the British Indian military were treated equally. Do you think this statement is true or false? Well, this statement is false. Just a while ago, we learnt about how the Indian Sepoys in the British Indian military or the British Indian Army were not given the recognition that they deserved. They were not treated equally. They were subjected to various kinds of discriminations, be that in the form of wages or the service conditions. And so, the British and Indian Sepoys were not treated equally in the British Indian Army. In our last lesson, we learned about how the peasants were reeling under the repercussions of the East India Company and its arbitrary policies that were imposed in the Indian subcontinent. Now, the peasants were the ones who hailed from rural spaces. They were grappling with poverty, hunger, illness, deaths. And many soldiers, that is to say, many Indian Sepoys were also from the rural regions. They saw face to face how the peasants were suffering because of the East India Company's rule, which is why the Sepoys were very unhappy with the situation of the peasants. The peasants were living absolutely miserable lives under the company's rule. They did not have sufficient money or food. There was a scarcity in the production of food grains, and we learnt why it was so. And these peasants were suffering, and the Sepoys were not at all happy with the situation of the peasants. And at the same time, the Sepoys also resented the annexation of Awadh. We learned that through the subsidiary alliance, Awadh was annexed by the East India Company. It was said that Nawab Wajid Ali Shah was misgoverning the kingdom of Awadh, which is why this kingdom was annexed by the East India Company. But as a term of the subsidiary alliance, the East India Company was not supposed to annex this region. But it did so nevertheless, which is why now the Indian sepoys realized that the East India Company was not at all trustworthy. It works back on its promises. It breaches trust and any kind of terms of treaties, which is why they resented the annexation of Awadh. And these were certain points that were there in the minds of Indian sepoys. And all this together finally pulled the trigger one day when the outbreak of the revolt of 1857 happened. Now there was another reason of resentment among the Indian sepoys serving in the British Indian Army. The General Service Enlistment Act of 1856 mandated that the Indian sepoys might have to go overseas if required. The Hindus took this as an attack on their religion. Why is it so? Because the Hindus at that point of time considered the seas as Kala Pani. And they thought that if they crossed the seas, they would lose their religious identity. So this was another reason of resentment among the Indian sepoys who were having to serve in the British Indian Army. Like the one we just discussed, there were many reasons why the Indian sepoys were severely angered by the army regulations. Many army regulations did not allow Indian soldiers to wear their religious identity markers like turbans, beards and other sectarian marks. Now turbans, beards or various other kinds of sectarian marks are considered very holy and pious by these people of the Indian subcontinent. And when these people had to let go of these religious identity markers, they were not at all happy to serve in the British Indian Army. They were filled with discontent and resentment and anger against all these army regulations.
Nahi Enfield rifle, दुनिया की सबसे अच्छी राइफल है Enfield और तुम्हारी पुरानी ब्राउन बेस मस्केट में ज्यादा फर्क नहीं बल्कि यह हल्की है और 1000 गज तक निशाना लगाती है पुरानी बंदूक से 5 गुना ज्यादा और यह है कारतूस इसमें बारूद भी है और गोली भी Billy Cartusco! That's it! Cato! Fear Barut under Dalo! Fear Yagoli Tuso! On Escabad! Zor! Say! Toko! Or Fire Kano!
Now the Indian masses were under the impression that the Britishers had come to the Indian subcontinent to completely demolish their religious identity. Firstly, the Indians saw that the company promoted the growth of many missionaries and the conversion to Christianity. And at the same time, they also realized that the company officials were trying to attack their religious sentiments. Now, in the January of 1857, a rumor spread among the Indian sepoys who were working in the British Indian Army. What was this rumor? This rumor was that the pepper cartridges of the Enfield rifles were greased with cow and pig fat. Now, during this time, the Britishers were wanting to introduce new kinds of ammunitions so as to replace the age-old ammunitions. And one of these new kind of ammunitions was the Enfield rifle. We just saw in the last clip that in order to make this Enfield rifle work, the cartridge had to be torn with one's mouth. And the rumor that spread was that this paper cartridge was greased with cow and pig fat. Now, cow is revered and worshipped as holy by the Hindus, and the Muslims consider pig unclean, which is why they religiously and traditionally do not consume pig. And when this rumor spread that these paper cartridges that had to be torn with the teeth were greased with cow and pig fat, the Hindus and the Muslims alike realized that the Britishers were trying to attack their religion and their religious sentiments. So this was a very important reason, if not the final nail in the coffin that led to the outbreak of the revolt of 1857. So we have discussed at great length the background of the causes that led to the Great Uprising of 1857. Diverse sections of the society were affected by the company's rules and policies and reforms. They were all suffering in their own ways, be that the zamindars, the local nawabs, rajas, or even the peasants, artisans, and even the Indian sepoys. We also delved quite deep into the reasons that led to the revolt of 1857. So at this point of time, the people realized that they would have to fight and vanquish the East India Company's rule and domination for once and for all. And to this end, it was on 29th March 1857 that few sepoys in Bengal broke out in rebellion. And this rebellion spread like wildfire among the masses. And this eventually took the shape of the Great Uprising of 1857 that lasted for one whole year. Now, the Great Uprising of 1857 has been crucial in the pages of history for reasons more than one. Firstly, it united the Indian masses on one common ground, that is, to fight back the East India Company. And at the same time, the East India Company's rule was also affected by this revolt of 1857. In our subsequent lesson, we will be focusing on the course that this revolt took over time. We will also focus on the various events that together entailed the Great Uprising of 1857. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at deltastep.com or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million+ questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it's rewarding too. So register for free now.